today is Arnt Thorkildsen. He's talking about genetically modified organisms, GMOs. So what exactly are GMOs, he asks? GMOs are plants or animals that have undergone a process wherein scientists alter their genes with DNA from different species of living organisms, bacteria or viruses, to get desired traits such as resistance to disease or tolerance of pesticides. But haven't farmers been selectively breeding crops to get larger harvests for centuries? How is this any different? Farmers throughout history have been raising their plants to achieve certain desired traits, such as improved taste, yield, or disease resistance. But this kind of breeding still relies on the natural reproductive processes of the organisms, like M&Ms, whereas genetic engineering involves the addition of foreign genes that would not occur in nature. Arnt Thorkildsen has traveled the world and studied food production and farming practices in Norway, Portugal, the Philippines, and Korea, as well as in the apple orchards and wheat farming in Washington State. He's been to chemical company seminars by Monsanto and Dow Chemical Companies, and researched the studies on GMOs, pesticides, chemicals, and their use and effects on world food production. Let us welcome Arnt Thorkildsen.
I just learned that this afternoon there will be a demonstration against GMOs and Monsanto in Chapala. I just hope it does not start here. There are times when I say to myself, I've heard it all, seen it all, there's nothing more that could surprise me. But that's not true, because I read an article the other day about the women who are trying to get a driver's license in Saudi Arabia. And the only way you get a driver's license in Saudi Arabia is with the grand permission of a Saudi Arabian cleric. He ruled that women should not drive a car because it may damage their ovaries. He did not say anything about a woman riding in a car, only if they drive it. When I first started my research on GMOs, genetically modified foods, pesticides, chemicals, and world food production, I thought it would be easy. But it has become the most difficult of subjects that I have worked on, because there is no consensus. There is no agreement with anyone regarding GMOs and the use of chemicals and pesticides anywhere. I would like to share with you today all that I have learned about GMOs, organic food, natural grown. I will also tell you a little bit about chemicals, pesticides, including obesity, diabetes, the Irish potato famine, the poison pill in India's search for cheap food, Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution and world population and how we are to feed the world. I'm not a scientist, and I do not wish to take sides on this subject. The subject being food and what we eat and choose not to eat. The use of GMOs, chemicals and pesticides upon the earth is a very controversial subject. There are many different views and opinions on this subject. I understand that, and I respect those views. The name Monsanto, to many people, is synonymous with the word poison. Monsanto has made many mistakes in its use of chemicals, the bovine growth hormone for milk production on cows, and the way it handled PCBs in Anniston, Alabama. Monsanto has also been accused by many as to the suicides of farmers in India buying and using Monsanto's BT cotton seeds. To say that Monsanto is evil is not fair. The truth always lies somewhere in between. I do know that the internet is a dangerous place, and there are lots of truths posted there as well as half-truths and some totally untrue. Many negative articles are by non-scientific people or organizations, so it is difficult to find one place or article listing both sides of the question as to the use or non-use of GMOs. Monsanto Chemical Company modified corn is highly controversial in Europe, and Europe has effectively banned the use of MON 810. One article says that Germany's decision to ban it is scientifically unjustified. Another says it is a political decision. Some highly disputed studies have tied MON 810 to health risks, and the fact remains that there is no solid scientific evidence to support the thinking that GMO crops are a threat to the well-being of those that consume them. MON 810 was approved for planting in Europe in 1998. But France, Austria, Hungary, Greece, and Germany enacted their own bans. On August 8, 2013, France's Council of State Court overturned that ban. On April 5, 2012, Poland banned MON 810 because the pollen in this strain could have a harmful effect upon bees. There is no evidence to support that bees are harmed by the BT protein. Since Monsanto is effectively out of Europe, they and two other chemical companies, E.I. DuPont and a Swiss company by the name of Syngenta, are now moving into Africa. The push is headed by Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United States, as well of the United Nations, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The one GMO that is currently creating a controversy is MON 810. So what is it? It is a genetically modified maize used around the world. It is a Zea maize line known as Yield Guard from Monsanto Chemical Company. This plant is designed to combat crop loss due to insects. There is an inserted gene in the DNA of MON 810 which allows the plant to make a protein that harms insects that try to eat it. The gene is from the Bacillus thuringiensis, which produces the BT toxin that is poisonous to insects, including the Asian and the European corn borer. Why are we so afraid of it? Is it because of the words that describe it, toxin and poisonous, or is it something else? I asked a friend of mine about GMOs, and he said, I just don't trust them, meaning the chemical companies. When I pressed Steve further, he said to me, I want everything organic everything. None of us like change, any kind of change, and if we do not understand it, especially when it comes to food, then it's twice as bad. When we go shopping and read a label, do we say, what is this stuff? I've done it, and so have you. But does just the fact that I read the label and do not understand it make the food bad for me? Genetically modified crops. GM critics have objected to GM crops per se on several grounds, including ecological concerns and economic concerns raised by the fact that these organisms are subject to intellectual property laws. This means that Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta chemical companies own the patent rights. GM crops are also involved in controversies over whether food produced from GM crops are safe and whether GM crops are needed to address world food needs. Which crops or foods are genetically modified? Alfalfa, canola, rapeseed, corn, field, maize, cotton and cottonseed oil, papaya in Hawaii, potatoes and potato seeds, rice. There is a new strain now being produced called golden rice, a new strain modified to contain beta-carotene, a source of vitamin A. It is forecast to be on the market in 2014 and 15 and would be an improvement to rice, since rice is not the best product to eat in the world. Also, soybeans, squash, zucchini, courgette, sugar beets, sugar cane, sweet peppers, tomatoes, but they were taken off the market due to commercial failure, and wheat. DuPont is currently working to improve the nutritional content on rice, cassava, sorghum, and bananas. DuPont plans to introduce a new product, an oil made from oleic beans. The oil is made from oleic soybeans and is free of trans fats and contains high amounts of a healthy monounsaturated fat. Simply put, this means lower bad cholesterol. Monsanto 810 has been approved for use in Mexico in 1998, but I doubt that it will ever be planted here. The main reason being that this is where corn was born. This is where the maize originated. And with the tortilla being the staple food of Mexico, I can understand the Mexicans' reluctance to accept it. There is one more thing. High fructose corn syrup. I've always thought that this one was much more controversial than MOM 810. Corn syrup is a substitute for sugar and is in most things that we eat or drink. There are many, many opinions on this food additive, and is that the reason why so many people are obese, or are there other reasons? A greater problem than GMOs, pesticides, or chemicals to human health is obesity, and current studies indicate that obesity is more dangerous to us than originally thought. Men over 40 should never increase their belt size. 10 to 20 pounds of belly fat or adipose tissue on men or women are not good for you. Diabetes is now an epidemic in Mexico, the USA, and also in China. 11.4% of the population in China has diabetes. With increased consumption of high calories, high fat, high sugar, high sodium diets, and a decreased physical activity, a more sedentary lifestyles, all are factors that lead to weight gain. Canada now has a public service announcement on television telling parents and kids to go out and play. The Irish potato famine, or when dirt goes bad. During the summer of 1845, a blight of unusual character devastated Ireland's potato crop. A few days after the potatoes were dug up from the ground, they began to turn into a slimy, decaying, blackish mass of rottenness. Experts said it was caused by static electricity, smoke from the railroad, and underground volcanoes. In fact, the cause was a fungus that had traveled from Mexico. Over the next 10 years, 750,000 Irish died and another 2 million left for England, Canada, and the USA. The famine was not strictly a natural disaster, it was also a product of social causes. Under British rule, Irish Catholics were prohibited from entering the professions or even purchasing land. And then the cassava, known as the breadfruit of the tropics. The cassava is a root grown in most countries, but 50% of the world's population comes from Nigeria. It is high in carbohydrates and zero in protein. It has hundreds of uses, but now it has a root fungus similar to the potato problem in Ireland. When dug up, instead of being white inside, it is black and mushy, and half the crop cannot be used. About 20 years ago in California, in the wine country, they suffered the same way. And 2 million vines had to be replaced and replanted. Also in 1900, Panama, the banana had a fungus. So the banana that you eat today is totally different from the banana of 1900. India produces 30% of the world's production of bananas. The banana grown in the Windward Islands go mainly to Europe. Ours comes from Ecuador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. It is the Cavendish banana, modified 100 years ago to combat the Panama disease, a root fungus that almost made the banana extinct. The Cavendish now has a lack of genetic diversity, and that makes it vulnerable to other diseases. Now the banana in 2013 is facing another root fungus called the black sigatoka. The poison pill in India's search for cheap food, monocroptophus, and 300 million illiterate people. The chemical monocroptophus has been banned by the World Health Organization, but India still uses it, and the Indian health industry calls it a benevolent pesticide. They use it because it's cheap to buy, and the Indian farmer who has little money cannot afford the more safer but expensive vegetable pesticides. 1 teaspoonful will kill you, and monocroptophus is used to commit suicide by many Indian farmers. The product is well labeled on how to use it: gloves, respirators, and protective clothing. But few do, and labeling is of little use where 25% of the population, or 300 million people, are still illiterate. An empty container of monocroptopus was used to store cooking oil in a school kitchen, and that is what killed the 28 children having lunch at school. India could save 20% of their food loss by eliminating rats, monkeys, or controlling them, and proper warehouse storage. But due to religious beliefs, like reincarnation, they will not change. All living animals, bugs and monkeys, are sacred, and you may come back from death as a rat or a monkey. Hindus are vegetarians. Naturally grown. There is a movement by some farmers for an alternative label to organic. Many farmers object to the high fees imposed by the FDA and paperwork they need to be certified as organic. They argue that they are just as good as organic and would like to have naturally grown to be also an accepted label. A study reported on September 26, 2013, states that organic is not any healthier than non-organic. Organic foods, are they safer or more nutritious? That you have to decide. There is no organic label in Mexico, and 90% of the fruits and vegetables that you buy on Wednesday at the Tianguis comes from the main market in Guadalajara, including imports from the USA and Chile. In speaking with Monsanto, I was informed that every plant and vegetable has been modified by something or someone over the last 100 years. Monsanto admitted that they have done a very poor job of informing the public about GMOs. And now the decision facing us is this: what is the best way to feed 8 billion people? In a few years, the world's population will be 10 and 12 and 15. So how did we get from Adam and Eve to 10 billion? In 1800, the world's population was 1 billion. In 1923, it was 2 billion. It took 123 years to go from 1 to 2, but only 40 more years to get to 3. And we have now added 1 billion people every 12 years, and now it's every 10 and every 8, and pretty soon it'll be every year. 100 years ago, all food was grown organically. Do we think that we can feed the world today and tomorrow organically and have all natural grown foods without the use of in-ground fertilizers, ground or aerial spraying of pesticides? Or are the chemicals as well as GMOs necessary? Let us start at the beginning. Norman Borlaug, the man who started it all, an American agronomist who has been called the father of the Green Revolution and agriculture's greatest spokesperson. Borlaug won the Nobel Prize in 1970 in recognition of his contribution to world peace through increasing food supply. Borlaug received his PhD in plant pathology and genetics from the University of Minnesota in 1942. He took up an agricultural research position in Mexico, where he developed a semi-dwarf, high-yield, disease-resistant wheat varieties. During the mid-20th century, Borlaug led the introduction of these high-yielding varieties, combined with modern agricultural production techniques to Mexico, Pakistan, and India. As a result, Mexico became a net exporter of wheat by 1963. Between 65 and 70, wheat production doubled in Pakistan and India. These collective increases in yield have been called the Green Revolution. And Borlaug is often credited with saving 1 billion people worldwide from starvation. He said, "There is no evidence to indicate that biotechnology is dangerous." Asked who is going to be concerned with the biosafety of once a floodgate has been opened for genetic engineering, he decried people who have been championing a GMO-free world as utopian thinkers who do not understand the complexities of food production. His grandfather, who strongly encouraged Borlaug's learning, said, "You're wiser to fill your head now if you want to fill your belly later on." I would like to make one comment in regards to the world's farmers and growers of food. I was 7 years old when I first planted anything in the ground. My father dug the furrows and my mother brought out buckets of last year's potatoes. She sliced them up, showing my younger brother and I where the eyes were and how to plant them. Later, Papa would cover the furrows and add manure over the field. I recall sitting in rice fields in the Philippines watching a family planting shoots in that wet and heavy mud, hour after hour, and the apple farmer walking through his orchards, who touched every tree as if he was saying hello to dear friends. The wheat farmer looking up into the sky and sniffing the air for moisture, his hands digging into the ground and smelling the dirt, and always looking at the weather reports and commodity prices. When we go shopping, we only see the end product of one man's labor. We do not see the farmer, the grower of our food. I have a tremendous respect for these people. Norman Borlaug opened the door to genetic technology, or Pandora's box. And it is here and it is wide open. And with so many crops and foods already modified in a hungry world, can the world be fed without the use of GMOs? Whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not, genetic technology on food is here to stay. We now have so many more ways to damage the planet. And we, as human beings, have not been, nor are we, good stewards of the earth. We all know about DDT. One more item. China. On September 30th, 2013, China just made a 50-year rental agreement with the country, the Ukraine, in what is called the largest land agreement of Eastern Europe. Under this rental agreement, China can use 5% of the Ukraine's land for growing crops in order to feed its burgeoning population. The arable land is the size of the state of Massachusetts. What is China thinking? And what does that mean for the rest of the world? This is what I call a game changer. And where is China going next? Africa? I can think of 10 different scenarios, but I do not think that the world fully understands yet as to what this really means. Personally, I think of the world as a long, long wall. In looking at that wall closely, I see many cracks appearing there. Some are small, but others are quite large and very significant. Hunger, pollution, overfishing, deforestation, global warming, the destruction of usable farmlands by an exploding population here in Brazil, Africa, Malaysia, and India. All the problems that I speak of do not appear to us here in our little garden. Only when you and I go outside this wall. I have always felt that education is one of the 7 pillars of wisdom. I wish I was wise enough to offer an answer as to what to do about our use of pesticides, chemicals, or whether the use of genetically modified food are good or bad for the world. I thank you for listening.
We're now open to questions. Hold your hand up and a microphone will be brought to you, and don't speak without a microphone. Thank you.
Sir, I'm from Argentina, and I can tell you the Chinese are already in Argentina. They've been renting large parcels of land, and they're cultivating soy in there. I don't know whether it's modified or not, but they're already in my country.
There's someone over here.
I guess to answer that, I'm not surprised, because not only is China here, they're in South America, they are one more thing. China now has surpassed the United States in the importation of oil. They are the largest importer of oil in the world. That just happened in the last couple of months. What they're going to do in Africa, they have a tremendous influence in Africa. But if you have ever been to China and seen the fact that China is not exactly flat. It's not West Texas, I'll tell you that. And it certainly isn't, Kansas by any means of the imagination. But what China thinks, we think, I think of equating it to the stock market. It always seems to think in quarter by quarter by quarter. China thinks in 10, 20, 50, and 100 years. And what this really means for them and their population and their influence and dominance, and how one country is now going to rent part of their farmable land to China. That's difficult to grasp. But you can come up with all kinds of scenarios as to direction and what China ultimately wants to do.
You have one here?
Is there any way we can get a copy of what you just read to us?
A copy of what, sir?
Of what you just said, the entire thing? Well, thank you, I didn't.
I think I have rewritten this thing 20 times, so I might have extra copies at home. But you're welcome to
To the one you're holding?
maybe.
Is-
You may have it, sir.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
He's coming up.
And Nash has the information and I got the phone. Some good news.
We're not advertising.
It's not an advertisement.
No, it's not advertising.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I do know that Monsanto is here in Mexico in 4 areas. So there is genetic corn in Mexico. And what we want to inform everybody, that's the truth, and we are working really hard to try to keep the original seeds intact.
I would like to make one comment too. I have a documentary that shows that corn has been so genetically modified over the years that no original strain of it can even exist now. So anybody would like that documentary, I'll be glad to give it to them. Well, yeah.
I have a few comments. I'll try to make them brief. First of all, Saudi Arabia is buying so much cropland in Chile to feed their people because they have no more water table left, that there's a new airline route that's opened up daily from Riyadh to Santiago. Number 2, the Stanford study. When you said it showed that organic was no healthier, that's not true. That if you go back to that original study at Stanford, it was the victim of bad headlines. I talked about this last year. The first person who read it saw that the first paragraph and the first sentence said, it's no more nutritious than other food, and that was the headline. But if you read the study, it shows that eating organic is 37% healthier than eating other food. So take a look at that study again. Third, Monsanto. I'm dealing with that issue right now. I'm an organic wheat farmer in Nebraska. I'm surrounded by Roundup no-till cropland. My production is higher than theirs, and the farmers are starting to rebel against this for 2 reasons. One, they're realizing that these pesticides they spray with are poisonous to themselves. A few of them are getting asthma from it. 2, they're realizing that they have 3 weeds that are completely Roundup resistant already, and they're fierce weeds. So they're spraying more and spraying more and spraying more, spending more money on these chemicals, and it's not improving their crops. And they're looking at me, and we till twice a year. They have to take their equipment out every month and spray. I till twice a year and get a better yield. So they're starting to realize by themselves that this Monsanto system is not so good. I'm not commenting on the GMO seeds. That's not part of my discussion with this. It's unquestioned that pesticides are not good for us. And all one has to do is spray a wasp with Raid and watch it die and know that's living tissue, to know that it affects humans in the same way. So organochlorines are bad for all of us, and Roundup is an organochlorine. There's no argument that I can see against that. So that's my big problem with Monsanto. Last comment, China's problem is not the kind of land they have. China's problem is that they've completely exhausted the water table in the entire northwest border of China, underneath their best crop growing land for wheat and some for rice. So it's their water table issue, that's all. And you can comment on that.
Ma'am, when I started this, I said, this is a highly controversial subject. And I believe that it is still a highly controversial subject. When it comes to China, I think what's interesting about that water problem you're talking about is that they have now one of the world's largest construction projects taking water from the three gorgeous dams all the way up to Beijing, China. And those things are humongous, the size of them. It's 1,000 or 2,000 miles long with pumps all the way along. Unfortunately, it's not big enough to handle the lack of water in Beijing.
What is your name? Thank you so much. You remind me again of the power of the individual. Gandhi, Lech Walesa, Cesar Chavez, and nobody here is going to believe this. When I was in the kindergarten, I went to school with Frances Thomas, and her and the Monsanto began with Frances Thomas's father, and my husband married the son, Carol Hockwald. Carol Hockwald and Mr. Thomas started Monsanto in the 30s. I am also concerned about all the information we get. My friend Molly over here reminded me that some big internet thing that's saying that these people started Stanford is all a hoax. None of it is true. So the person I got the email from forward, I sent it to her and said, this is a hoax, this is not true. How much of what we hear is true?
Thank you. Right there, just like that, good. An example of how bad the pesticides are is exactly what's happening to our monarch butterflies. We live in Minnesota. We know we have milkweed in our pasture, and there are very few monarch butterflies making it down here. 75% have died, and the common determination that I'm hearing from the people in Minnesota and elsewhere is it's due to pesticides that are killing the milkweed plant. If it kills the milkweed plant, it's killing other insects, so we're damaging our environment. And to me, that makes no sense. And I want to acknowledge Pia's comment. There are other ways to do this. Our bee population is dying. And so when we talk about feeding the people, we're also destroying the very thing that keeps it going. And I find it really disturbing that that was not acknowledged by you.
You know, I think, as I said earlier in some of my comments, we have not been good stewards of the earth. And we are finding so many more different ways to destroy it, to damage it. And what the end solution is, it's going to take years and years to try and figure out how we are. Yes, I agree with you. It is a very controversial subject. I don't think anyone is for pesticides. Nobody.
Question here, comment?
Yes, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned here is that the seeds produced by the GMOs are sterile. So this means that you have to buy from the GMO companies every year.
Yes.
And this will have an absolutely devastating effect on the marginal and subsistence farmers of the world, who constitute the larger bulk of farmers.
Well, I think you can talk about a lot of those things, whether it's the BT cotton that's it's so controversial in India. In fact, I believe that they have stopped using it because of the fact that it is more expensive, and the poor Indian farmer is having a difficult time year after year. He can't, in other words, he can't husband seeds from last year and replant them. It just isn't possible. The difference between the between the organic, so to speak, cottonseed is, a big difference is the resistance to disease on the BT cotton, but also the BT cotton requires twice as much water as an organic one does. And if you don't have the pumps or the irrigation to produce it, you're twice as bad off.
Here.
I bring up the thing that nobody wants to talk about. What is the cause of this problem? We have too many people.
Well,
It is a fact. Knowing what I know now, I would not have had 5 children. But I will say, my family is not increasing. There are only 5 grandchildren. And the next generation will be even smaller. You mentioned education, and that is so important. I mean, would we all try to go and live in the sala? But that's kind of what we're doing in the world. And how come we're here in Ajijic? Why aren't we in Mexico City, right down in the middle where it's crowded, if we like to be with all these people? No, we don't want that. That's where it is. As far as I'm concerned, I think birth control, any kind you want, should be totally free all over the world.
I certainly can't disagree with anything that you say. In 2 weeks, I'm also speaking again, and this subject will be why some societies fail and others succeed. And in that, we are going to discuss population and what it does or does not do. And there are many examples of where you have too many people for too little land, or you have a family that has 15 or 18 kids and you can only divide the acre so many ways, and you can only feed so many people. It is, you know, if you're going to get into that, why there are so many people, then you have to start with the Vatican and the Pope, and then you have to start with the Muslims, and then you have to start with the fact that one Muslim, if he's rich enough, he can buy 5 wives, or, I mean, it just goes on. And until the world decides, until somebody says, hey, enough is enough, it ain't gonna stop. I don't know of anybody who doesn't enjoy sex, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I enjoy having another child. And that's the problem. So what do you do?
In my opinion, Monsanto and similar companies never will solve problem of hunger in the world. It is my opinion. And in the last issue of news, local newspaper, there is an article about Mexican government regarding GMO. GMO. So it's in the source.
You know, I think that the biggest thing for me is, and I have so much research on GMOs and pesticides and chemicals, and I look at it and I said, I'm not an agronomist, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a bioethicist, I'm not, you know, this. The difficulty is in finding something or someone or a symposium of learned men that can sit down and I apologize. Maybe it should be a symposium run by women. Well, a few men. And that can, you know, because there is just so much, and as Norman Borlaug said, you just don't understand the complexities of food production. You really don't grasp it. And just like the potato famine in Ireland, 150 years ago, they came up with the looniest ideas you've ever heard of. Smoke from the railroad trains and underground volcanoes, and who knows what else they thought about. But until you really understand that some things happen to earth, to dirt, and you can't continue to use the same thing over and over and over again. If you look at the San Joaquin Valley, where they have put so much fertilizer and so much stuff and so much water into that land, now it is nothing but salt that comes out. And how to get rid of the salt is another problem.
I want to thank you for giving us depth, dimension to this discussion, because it is very controversial, as you mentioned. We have probably some common origins, because I was a manager of the Wheat Marketing Center in Portland for 7 years. What you've shown is that the complexity of issues like the burgeoning human population on this planet, what you see in terms of profit motive and the way they distort these processes, whether it is GMO, whether it is the idea of organics, because I think even more critical in our world today, and you mentioned it but didn't say it in quite the same way, is not the issue of energy, it's the issue of fresh water. And 12 billion human beings on this planet, we better all start figuring out how to drink beer.
Yeah. Well, when you go back to the simple fact that 100 years ago, in 1900, we only had 2 billion people, or 1923, I should say, we had 2 billion people. And now, all of a sudden, exponentially, we just explode. So, I would agree with you that it would be nice if we were in 1900 and we could grow everything organically, and we wouldn't have to sit in long lines wherever we go in this world, including the airport, to be frisked by, what's the name of that group? TSA. That would be the simple version, and as Steve said, he says, I want everything organically. The real question is, how can 12 billion people survive organically? How can you do it anymore? I'm not sure what the answer is.
Now, here,
I wish I did.
Thank you for your research, and you brought a point on fructose. Back in '86, I remember a friend who opened a vitamin company, started putting fructose in his vitamins, and he was very successful, and I thought that was wrong. But recently I did some research on fructose from a doctor of a children's hospital in San Francisco, and he's finding 5-year-old kids are getting obese. And he decided to really do research, and he found that fructose is different from other sugars. It's digested as a fat, not as a sugar, but it's fat on your waist. So he's taking these young kids and taking every liquid drink out of their houses and making them exercise 2 hours a day. Do your due diligence and search it. Fructose is digested as a fat. You want to lose weight, get off fructose.
Well, I think as a parent and as a grandparent, you have an obligation to teach your children the right foods and the wrong foods and what they should or should not eat. And, the amount of junk that kids eat, to me, is absolutely amazing. I never grew up that way, or neither did you. But it is controversial. There's no question about it. But high fructose is not the real reason for obesity in kids. It has to be something else. It's a combination of everything, and I think I pointed that out in the article.
here.
When somebody over here was talking about how the poor farmers are going to be able to afford the stuff that they need now to continue, well, remember in the U.S. when the banks and everything came back and took over the properties because the farmers were so far in debt? Well, that's what's the scenario here in Mexico, because if the farmers can't afford the stuff, the companies are happy to loan them the money as long as they have a hold of their escritura, the deed to their property. So the same kind of thing is happening here as happened in the U.S. And for the lady that said she had 5 kids, I only have 1. Both my husband and my ex came from large families, and it was a decision we made right at the very beginning. We were going to have one, and if we wanted more, we were going to adopt. And I have my baptized Catholic husband who decided not to have any because he has a ton of nieces and nephews. Therefore, we're in a position to be able to help them go to school.
We'll have time only for one or two more questions, so, Arun?
Yes. The good news is that our beautiful earth will recuperate. If we want to self-destroy in a few years, the earth will recuperate.
Oh, I would like to suggest something about now I'm here because we are here in Ajijic. Try to say bee because you can see in the internet how it's a big problem that the bees are disappearing. Okay?
You know, I firmly believe the more I research and the more I read this and the more I listen to your comments, what we will eat 50 years from now is going to be totally different than what I think we are consuming today. And the fact that when you go out into space, I don't know what you eat when you're up there for a couple of weeks, but whether it's going to be a pill or a tablet or something out of a tube, we may have a totally different diet entirely 50 to 100 years from now.
Yes. Well, I hope that we can get off the junk food. I mean, when you think about how we're going to feed all these billions of people, somehow we feed, you know, a continent or two on junk food.
Yeah.
So that's, again, where the education comes in. Are we going to, I mean, it kills me when I go into Walmart and see all those juices, and they're all contaminated with fructose and God only knows what else. And I just personally will not buy anything that has a label on it. If it has this, and this, and that in it, because I'm not going with a little, what do you call those? Magnifying glass. I refuse. And we just don't need junk. And if we had some nutrients in our food, oh, what a concept. We don't need all these volumes of product. We don't. And if we can stop eating for entertainment, that would be a biggie too.
When I go into my corner little tienda right around the corner, I can hardly find the little counter man that serves me because of all the junk stuff hanging in front of me. It's like he is hidden amongst everything that's bad for you, but that's what the kids and that's what the people buy. I do firmly believe that you really are what you eat, and you better understand exactly what this stuff is. I mean, I hardly ever drink Coca-Cola anymore. Huh? Anymore. Well, you know, when advertising is a tremendous influence in what we do and what we eat and how we behave. I never knew that I had underarm BO until I watched television, and I didn't know that it existed.
We're going to have to wrap it up after this one.
Thank you very much for this highly controversial conversation. I appreciate very much what you say. I'm an organic farmer here in Ajijic, and I understand, because of all this complexity problem that you are addressing, that your comments have given me some light in terms of what you just said about positive GMs and negative GMs. I mean, not all is negative. Take, for example, the wild mustard plant. wild mustard plant maybe 60 years ago was modified, and it gave birth to broccoli. It gave birth to Brussels sprouts and kale. And all of these we have been enjoying because they've been positively modified genetically, but within their own species. So it's a natural advancement. It's like forwarding, fast forwarding nature in a fact that is giving positive consequences to food production. I think when we intervene with foreign genes, then that kind of makes me believe that there are negative consequences for health that is being studied so far. What I want to address is the issue that we want to, obviously I want to know your comments on that positive and negative aspects of genetically modified foods. But I also understand that there's a shift in consciousness in terms of thinking in growing small, or small is beautiful. Organically grown foods, if we are taking it to the family and we have learned to grow our own food production systems, maybe that would be an answer for us to learn more and take it to the public, to society, to the urban areas, to the suburban and to rural areas, so that we can think small and support our local farmers, because if there's no farms, there's no food.
I understand what you're saying about local and small, and one person or one family on 1 acre can sustain themselves. There's no question about that. But you can't sustain 10 or 12 billion people in this earth. When you look at a soybean field in Kansas or Iowa, that man has got 60,000 acres that he runs these John Deere combines 24/7. And when you think of 20 million people or 25 living in Mexico City, they cannot have 1 acre apiece to grow things organically. We're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.